This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Read by West Winds 12. Sing a Song of Sixpence, a selection from Mother Goose in prose by L. Frank Baum. Sing a song of sixpence, a handful of rye, 24 blackbirds baked in a pie. When the pie was opened, the birds began to sing. Was not that a dainty dish to set before the king? If you have never heard the legend of Gilligren and the king's pie, you will scarcely understand the above verse, so I will tell you the whole story, and then you will be able to better appreciate the rhyme. Gilligren was an orphan, and lived with an uncle and aunt who were very unkind to him. They cuffed him and scolded him upon the slightest provocation, and made his life very miserable indeed. Gilligren never rebelled against this treatment, but bore their cruelty silently and with patience, although often he longed to leave them and seek a home amongst kinder people. It so happened that when Gilligren was 12 years old the king died, and his son was to be proclaimed king in his place, and crowned with great ceremony. People were flocking to London from all parts of the country to witness the festivities, and the boy longed to go with them. One evening he said to his uncle, "If I had sixpence, I could make my fortune."
"Pooh, nonsense!" exclaimed his uncle. "A sixpence is a small thing. How then could you make a fortune from it?"
"That I cannot tell you," replied Gilligren, "but if you will give me the sixpence, I will go to London and not return until I am a rich man."
"The boy is a fool,"
said his uncle with anger, but the aunt spoke up quickly. "Give him the money and let him go," she said, "and then we shall be well rid of him, and no longer be obliged to feed and clothe him at our expense."
"Well,"
said her husband, after a moment's thought,
"here is the money, but remember, this is all I shall ever give you, and when it is gone you must not come to me for more."
"Never fear," replied Gilligren joyfully as he put the sixpence in his pocket. "I shall not trouble you again." The next morning he cut a short stick to assist him in walking, and after bidding good-bye to his uncle and aunt he started upon his journey to London.
"The money will not last him 2 days,"
said the man, as he watched Gilligren go down the turnpike road,
"and then, when it's gone, he will starve to death."
"Or he may fall in with people who will treat him worse than we did," rejoined the woman, "and then he'll wish he had never left us." But Gilligren, nothing dismayed by thoughts of the future, trudged bravely along the London road. The world was before him, and the bright sunshine glorified the dusty road and lighted the tips of the dark green hedges that bordered his path. At the end of his pilgrimage was the great city, and he never doubted he would find there within proper work and proper pay, and much better treatment than he was accustomed to receive. So on he went, whistling merrily to while away the time, watching the sparrows skim over the fields, and enjoying to the full the unusual sights that met his eyes. At noon he overtook a carter, who divided with the boy his luncheon of bread and cheese, and for supper a farmer's wife gave him a bowl of milk. When it grew dark he crawled under a hedge and slept soundly until dawn. The next day he kept steadily upon his way, and toward evening met a farmer with a wagon loaded with sacks of grain.
"Where are you going, my lad?"
asked the man. "To London," replied Gilligren, "to see the king crowned."
"Have you any money?"
inquired the farmer. "Oh yes," answered Gilligren, "I have sixpence."
"If you will give me the sixpence," said the man, "I will give you a sack of rye for it."
"What could I do with a sack of rye?" asked Gilligren wonderingly.
"Take it to the mill and get it ground into flour. With the flour you could have bread baked, and that you can sell."
"That is a good idea," replied Gilligren. "So here is my sixpence, and now give me the sack of rye." The farmer put the sixpence carefully into his pocket, and then reached under the seat of the wagon and threw out a sack, which he cast upon the ground at the boy's feet.
"There's your sack of rye,"
he said with a laugh. "But the sack is empty," remonstrated Gilligren.
"Oh no, there is some rye in it."
"But only a handful," said Gilligren, when he had opened the mouth of the sack and gazed within it.
"It is a sack of rye, nevertheless," replied the wicked farmer, "and I did not say how much rye there would be in the sack I would give you. Let this be a lesson to you never again to buy grain without looking into the sack."
And with that he whipped up his horses and left Gilligren standing in the road with the sack at his feet and nearly ready to cry at his loss. "My sixpence is gone," he said to himself, "and I have received nothing in exchange but a handful of rye. How can I make my fortune with that?" He did not despair, however, but picked up the sack and continued his way along the dusty road. Soon it became too dark to travel farther, and Gilligren stepped aside into a meadow, where, lying down upon the sweet grass, he rolled the sack into a pillow for his head and prepared to sleep. The rye that was within the sack, however, hurt his head, and he sat up and opened the sack. "Why should I keep a handful of rye?" he thought. "It will be of no value to me at all." So he threw out the rye upon the ground, and rolling up the sack again for a pillow, was soon sound asleep. When he awoke the sun was shining brightly over his head, and the twitter and chirping of many birds fell upon his ears. Gilligren opened his eyes and saw a large flock of blackbirds feeding upon the rye he had scattered upon the ground. So intent were they upon their feast they never noticed Gilligren at all. He carefully unfolded the sack and spread wide its opening, threw it quickly over the flock of blackbirds. Some escaped and flew away, but a great many were caught, and Gilligren put his eye to the sack and found he had captured 24. He tied the mouth of the sack with a piece of twine that was in his pocket, and then threw the sack over his shoulder and began again his journey to London. "I have made a good exchange after all," he thought, "for surely 24 blackbirds are worth more than a handful of rye, and perhaps even more than a sixpence, if I can find someone who wishes to buy them." He now walked rapidly forward, and about noon entered the great city of London. Gilligren wandered about the streets until he came to the king's palace, where there was a great concourse of people and many guards to keep intruders from the gates. Seeing he could not enter from the front, the boy walked around to the rear of the palace and found himself near the royal kitchen, where the cooks and other servants were rushing around to hasten the preparation of the king's dinner. Gilligren sat down upon a stone where he could watch them, and laying the sack at his feet, was soon deeply interested in the strange sight. Presently a servant in the king's livery saw him and came to his side. "What are you doing here?" he asked roughly. "I am waiting to see the king," replied Gilligren. "The king? The king never comes here," said the servant, "and neither do we allow idlers about the royal kitchen, so depart at once, or I shall be forced to call a guard to arrest you." Gilligren arose obediently and slung his sack over his shoulder. As he did so the birds that were within began to flutter. "What have you in the sack?" asked the servant. "Blackbirds," said Gilligren. "Blackbirds!" echoed the servant in surprise. "Well, that is very fortunate indeed. Come with me at once." He seized the boy by the arm and drew him hastily along until they entered the great kitchen of the palace. "Here, Mr. Baker," the man called excitedly, "I have found your blackbirds." A big, fat man, who was standing in the middle of the kitchen, with folded arms and a look of despair upon his round, greasy face, at once came towards them and asked eagerly, "The blackbirds? Are you sure you can get them?" "They are here already. The boy has a bag full of them." "Give them to me," said the cook, who wore a square cap that was shaped like a box upon his head. "What do you want with them?" asked Gilligren. "I want them for a pie for the king's dinner," answered Mr. Baker. "His Majesty ordered the dish, and I have hunted all over London for the blackbirds, but could not find them. Now that you have brought them, however, you have saved me my position as cook, and perhaps my head as well." "But it would be cruel to put the beautiful birds in a pie," remonstrated Gilligren, and I shall not give them to you for such a purpose.
Nonsense, replied the cook. The king has ordered it. He is very fond of the dish.
Still, you cannot have them, declared the boy stoutly. The birds are mine, and I will not have them killed.
But what can I do? asked the cook in a perplexity. The king has ordered a blackbird pie, and your birds are the only blackbirds in London. Gilligren thought deeply for a moment, and conceived what he thought to be a very good idea. If the sixpence was to make his fortune, then this was his great opportunity.
You can have the blackbirds on 2 conditions, he said.
What are they? asked the cook.
One is that you will not kill the birds. The other condition is that you secure me a position in the king's household.
How can I put live birds in a pie? inquired the cook.
Very easily, if you make the pie big enough to hold them. You can serve the pie after the king has satisfied his hunger with other dishes, and it will amuse the company to find live birds in the pie when they expected cooked ones.
It is a risky experiment, exclaimed the cook, for I do not know the new king's temper, but the idea may please his majesty, and since you will not allow me to kill the birds, it is the best thing I can do. As for your other condition, you seem to be a very bright boy, and so I will have the butler take you as his page, and you shall stand back of the king's chair and keep the flies away while he eats. The butler being called, and his consent secured, the cook fell to making the crust for his novel pie, while Gilligren was taken to the servants' hall and dressed in a gorgeous suit of the king's livery. When the dinner was served, the king kept looking for the blackbird pie, but he said nothing, and at last the pie was placed before him, its crust looking light and brown, and sprigs of myrtle being stuck in the 4 corners to make it look more inviting. Although the king had already eaten heartily, he smacked his lips when he saw this tempting dish, and picking up the carving fork, he pushed it quickly into the pie. At once the crust fell in, and all the 24 blackbirds put up their heads and began to look about them, and coming from the blackness of the pie into the brilliantly lighted room, they thought they were in the sunshine, and began to sing merrily, while some of the boldest hopped out upon the table, or began to fly around the room. At first the good king was greatly surprised, but soon, appreciating the jest, he lay back in his chair and laughed long and merrily, and his courtiers and the fine ladies present heartily joined in the laughter, for they also were greatly amused. Then the king called for the cook, and when Mr. Baker appeared, uncertain of his reception, and filled with many misgivings, his majesty cried, "Sirrah, how came you to think of putting live birds in the pie?" The cook, fearing that the king was angry, answered, "May it please your majesty, it was not my thought, but the idea of the boy who stands behind your chair." The king turned his head, and seeing Gilligren, who looked very well in his new livery, he said, "You are a clever youth, and deserving a better position than that of a butler's lad. Hereafter you shall be one of my own pages, and if you serve me faithfully, I will advance your fortunes with your deserts." And Gilligren served the king faithfully, and as he grew older acquired much honour and great wealth. "After all," he used to say, "that sixpence made my fortune, and it all came about through such a small thing as a handful of rye." End of Sing a Song of Sixpence, a selection from Mother Goose in Prose by L. Frank Baum. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Cat and the Fiddle, a selection from Mother Goose in Prose by L. Frank Baum. Read by West Winds 12. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran off with the spoon. Perhaps you think this verse is all nonsense, and that the things it mentions could never have happened. But they did happen, as you will understand when I have explained them all to you clearly.
Little Bobby was the only son of a small farmer who lived out of town upon a country road. Bobby's mother looked after the house, and Bobby's father took care of the farm, and Bobby himself, who was not very big, helped them both as much as he was able. It was lonely upon the farm, especially when his father and mother were both busy at work, but the boy had one way to amuse himself that served to pass many an hour when he would not otherwise have known what to do. He was very fond of music, and his father one day brought him from the town a small fiddle or violin, which he soon learned to play upon. I don't suppose he was a very fine musician, but the tunes he played pleased himself, as well as his father and mother, and Bobby's fiddle soon became his constant companion. One day, in the warm summer, the farmer and his wife determined to drive to the town to sell their butter and eggs and bring back some groceries in exchange for them, and while they were gone Bobby was to be left alone. "We shall not be back until late in the evening," said his mother, "for the weather is too warm to drive very fast. But I have left you a dish of bread and milk for your supper, and you must be a good boy and amuse yourself with your fiddle until we return." Bobby promised to be good and look after the house, and then his father and mother climbed into the wagon and drove away to the town. The boy was not entirely alone, for there was a big black tabby cat lying upon the floor in the kitchen, and the little yellow dog barking at the wagon as it drove away, and the big muley cow lowing in the pasture down by the brook. Animals are often very good company, and Bobby did not feel nearly as alone as he would had there been no living thing about the house. Besides, he had some work to do in the garden, pulling up the weeds that grew thick in the carrot bed, and when the last faint sounds of the wheels had died away he went into the garden and began his task. The little dog went too, for dogs love to be with people and to watch what is going on, and he sat down near Bobby and cocked up his ears and wagged his tail and seemed to take a great interest in the weeding. Once in a while he would rush away to chase a butterfly or bark at a beetle that crawled through the garden, but he always came back to the boy and kept near his side. By and by the cat, which found it lonely in the big empty kitchen, now that Bobby's mother was gone, came walking into the garden also, and lay down upon a path in the sunshine and lazily watched the boy at his work. The dog and the cat were good friends, having lived together so long that they did not care to fight each other. To be sure, Towser, as the little dog was called, sometimes tried to tease Pussy, being himself very mischievous, but when the cat put out her sharp claws and showed her teeth, Towser, like a wise little dog, quickly ran away, and so they managed to get along in a friendly manner. By the time the carrot bed was well weeded, the sun was sinking behind the edge of the forest and the new moon rising in the east, and now Bobby began to feel hungry and went into the house for his dish of bread and milk. "I think I'll take my supper down to the brook," he said to himself, "and sit upon the grassy bank while I eat it, and I'll take my fiddle too and play upon it to pass the time until father and mother come home." It was a good idea, for down by the brook it was cool and pleasant, so Bobby took his fiddle under his arm and carried his dish of bread and milk down to the bank that sloped to the edge of the brook. It was rather a steep bank, but Bobby sat upon the edge, and placing his fiddle beside him, leaned against a tree and began to eat his supper. The little dog had followed at his heels, and the cat also came slowly walking after him, and as Bobby ate they sat one on either side of him and looked earnestly into his face as if they too were hungry. So he threw some of the bread towards Towser, who grabbed it eagerly and swallowed it in the twinkling of an eye, and Bobby left some of the milk in the dish for the cat also, and she came lazily up and drank it in a dainty, sober fashion, and licked both the dish and the spoon until no drop of milk was left. Then Bobby picked up his fiddle and tuned it and began to play some of the pretty tunes he knew. And while he played he watched the moon rise higher and higher until it was reflected in the smooth, still water of the brook. Indeed, Bobby could not tell which was the plainest to see, the moon in the sky or the moon in the water. The little dog lay quietly on one side of him, and the cat softly purred upon the other, and even the mooly cow was attracted by the music and wandered nearer until she was browsing the grass at the edge of the brook. After a time, when Bobby had played all the tunes he knew, he laid the fiddle down beside him, near to where the cat slept, and then he lay down upon the bank and began to think. It is very hard to think long upon a dreamy summer night without falling asleep, and very soon Bobby's eyes closed and he forgot all about the dog and the cat and the cow and the fiddle, and dreamed he was Jack the Giant Killer and was just about to slay the biggest giant in the world. And while he dreamed, the cat sat up and yawned and stretched herself, and then began wagging her long tail from side to side and watching the moon that was reflected in the water. But the fiddle lay just behind her, and as she moved her tail, she drew it between the strings of the fiddle, where it caught fast. Then she gave her tail a jerk and pulled the fiddle against the tree, which made a loud noise. This frightened the cat greatly, and not knowing what was the matter with her tail, she started to run as fast as she could. But still the fiddle clung to her tail, and at every step it bounced along and made such a noise that she screamed with terror. And in her fright she ran straight towards the cow, which, seeing a black streak coming at her, and hearing the racket made by the fiddle, became also frightened and made such a jump to get out of the way that she jumped right across the brook, leaping over the very spot where the moon shone in the water. Bobby had been awakened by the noise, and opened his eyes in time to see the cow jump, and at first it seemed to him that she had actually jumped over the moon in the sky, instead of the one in the brook. The dog was delighted at the sudden excitement caused by the cat, and ran barking and dancing along the bank, so that he presently knocked against the dish, and behold, it slid down the bank, carrying the spoon with it, and fell with a splash into the water of the brook. As soon as Bobby recovered from his surprise, he ran after the cat, which had raced to the house, and soon came to where the fiddle lay upon the ground, it having at last dropped from the cat's tail. He examined it carefully, and was glad to find it was not hurt, in spite of its rough usage. And then he had to go across the brook and drive the cow back over the little bridge, and also to roll up his sleeve and reach into the water to recover the dish and the spoon. Then he went back to the house and lighted a lamp, and sat down to compose a new tune before his mother and father returned. The cat had recovered from her fright and lay quietly under the stove, and Towser sat upon the floor, panting, with his mouth wide open, and looking so comical that Bobby thought he was actually laughing at the whole occurrence. And these were the words to the tune that Bobby composed that night. Hey diddle diddle, the cat and the fiddle, the cow jumped over the moon. The little dog laughed to see such sport, and the dish ran off with the spoon. End of The Cat and the Fiddle, from Mother Goose in Prose by L. Frank Baum. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information and to find out how you can volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. The Black Sheep, a selection from Mother Goose in Prose by L. Frank Baum. Read by West Winds 12. Black sheep, have you any wool? Yes, my little master, 3 bags full. 1 for my master, 1 for his dame, and 1 for the little boy that lives in the lane. It was a bright spring day, and the sun shone very warm and pleasant over the pastures, where the new grass was growing so juicy and tender that all the sheep thought they had never tasted anything so delicious. The sheep had had a strange experience that morning, for the farmer had taken them down to the brook and washed them, and then he tied their legs together and laid them on the grass, and clipped all the heavy, soft wool from their bodies with a great pair of shears. The sheep did not like this very well, for every once in a while the shears would pull the wool and hurt them, and when they were sheared they felt very strange, for it was almost as if someone took off all your clothes and let you run around naked. None of them were in a very good temper this morning, although the sun shone so warmly and the grass was so sweet, and as they watched the farmer and his man carry their wool up to the house in great bags, the old ram said crossly, "I hope they are satisfied now that they have stolen from us all our soft, warm fleece." "What are they going to do with it?" asked one of the sheep. "Oh, they will spin it into threads and make coats for the men and dresses for the women, for men are such strange creatures that no wool grows on them at all, and that is why they selfishly rob us of our fleece, that they may cover their own skinny bodies." "It must be horrid to be a man," said the black sheep, "and not to have any wool grow on you at all. I'm sorry for that little boy that lives in the lane, for he will never be able to keep warm unless we give him some of our wool." "But what a shame it is," continued the ram, "for the farmer to steal all the wool from us when we have taken all the trouble to grow it." "I don't mind," bleated a young lamb named Frisky, as it kicked up its heels and gambolled about upon the grass. "It's nice to have all that heavy wool cut off my back, for I shan't have to carry it around everywhere I go." "Oh, indeed," sneered the ram. "You like it, do you? Have you any idea what you look like, all sheared down to your skin? How would you like to have someone come along and see you, now that you are all head and legs?" "Oh, I wouldn't mind," said the lamb again. "I shall grow more wool by winter time, and I'm sure I don't look any worse than you do." Some of the sheep looked at the ram and began to titter, for he was old and thin and looked very comical indeed without any wool, and this made him so angry that he went off by himself and began eating grass, and would not speak to the others at all. "I don't know why sheep should feel badly about having their fleeces cut," remarked the black sheep thoughtfully, "for the farmer is very kind to us, and so is his dame, and I am glad my wool serves to keep them warm in the winter. For before the snow comes our wool will grow out again, and we shall not be any the worse for our loss." "What do those people who don't have any sheep do for clothes?" asked the lamb. "I'm sure I don't know. They must nearly freeze in the winter. Perhaps the ram can tell us." But the ram was still angry and refused to say anything, so the sheep stopped talking and began to scatter over the pasture and eat the tender new grass. By and by the black sheep wandered near the lane, and looking up saw the little boy watching it through the bars. "Good morning, Black Sheep," said the little boy. "Why do you look so funny this morning?" "They have cut off all my wool," answered the sheep. "What will they do with it, Black Sheep?" inquired the little boy. "They will make coats of it, to keep themselves warm." "I wish I had some wool," said the little boy, "for I need a new coat very badly, and mamma is so poor she cannot buy me one." "That is too bad," replied the black sheep, "but I shall have more wool by and by, and then I will give you a bagful to make a new coat from." "Will you really?" asked the boy, looking very much pleased. "Indeed I will," answered the sheep, "for you are always kind and have a pleasant word for me. So you watch until my wool grows again, and then you shall have your share of it." "Oh, thank you!" said the boy, and he ran away to tell his mother what the black sheep had said. When the farmer came into the field again, the black sheep said to him, "Master, how many bags of wool did you cut from my back?" "2 bags full," replied the farmer, "and it was very nice wool indeed." "If I grow 3 bags full the next time, may I have 1 bag for myself?" asked the sheep. "Why, what could you do with a bag of wool?" questioned the farmer. "I want to give it to the little boy that lives in the lane. He is very poor and needs a new coat." "Very well," answered the master. "If you can grow 3 bags full, I will give one to the little boy." So the black sheep began to grow wool, and tried in every way to grow the finest and heaviest fleece in all the flock. She always lay in the sunniest part of the pastures, and drank from the clearest part of the brook, and ate only the young and juicy shoots of grass, and the tenderest of the sheep's sorrel. And each day the little boy came to the bars, and looked at the sheep, and inquired how the wool was growing. "I am getting along finely," the black sheep would answer, "for not one sheep in the pasture has so much wool as I have grown already." "Can I do anything to help you?" asked the little boy. "Not that I can think of," replied the sheep, "unless you could get me a little salt. I believe salt helps the wool to grow." So the little boy ran to the house and begged his mother for a handful of salt, and then he came back to the bars, where the black sheep licked it out of his hands. Day by day the wool on the sheep grew longer and longer, and even the old ram noticed it, and said, "You are foolish to grow so much wool, for the farmer will cut it all off, and it will do you no good. Now I am growing just as little as possible, for since he steals what I have, I am determined he shall get very little wool from my back." The black sheep did not reply to this, for she thought the old ram very ill-tempered and selfish, and believed he was doing wrong not to grow more wool. Finally the time came to shear the sheep again, and the farmer and his man came into the pasture to look at them, and were surprised to see what a fine big fleece the black sheep had grown. "There will be 3 bags full at least," said the master, "and I will keep my promise and give one to the little boy in the lane. But, my goodness, how scraggly and poor the old ram looks! There is scarcely any wool on him at all. I think I must sell him to the butcher." And, in truth, although the ram kicked and struggled and bleated with rage, they tied his legs and put him into the cart and carried him away to the butcher, and that was the last the sheep ever saw of him. But the black sheep ran up to the bars by the lane and waited with a glad heart until the little boy came. When he saw the sheep waiting for him, he asked, Black sheep, have you any wool?" And the sheep replied, "Yes, my little master, 3 bags full." "That is fine," said the boy, "but who are the 3 bags for?" "One for my master, one for his dame, and one for the little boy that lives in the lane." "Thank you, Black Sheep," said the little boy. "You are very kind, and I shall always think of you when I wear my new coat." The next day the sheep were all sheared, and the black sheep's fleece made 3 bags full. The farmer kept his promise and carried 1 bag to the little boy that lived in the lane, and the wool was so soft and so heavy that there was enough not only for the new coat, but to make his mother a warm dress as well. The black sheep was very proud and happy when the mother and her little boy came down to the bars and showed them the new clothes that had been made from the wool. "This pays me for all my trouble," said the black sheep, and the little boy reached his hand through the bars and patted her gently upon the head. End of The Black Sheep, a selection from Mother Goose in Prose by L. Frank Baum.